Kamala's audience squirms as she yaks about pachyderms. Our video of the day comes to us from the former VP who made her first major speech last night since Trump took office. And it was another classic ball of verbal vomit. Here she is referencing a viral video of elephants. Watch.
Who saw that video from a couple of weeks ago? The one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake? And as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other to protect the most vulnerable. Think about it. What a powerful metaphor.
Yeah. It's almost like they built a wall.
Imagine a public address so bewildering, so utterly devoid of coherent meaning, that it didn't just confuse audiences, it transformed into a national spectacle of head-scratching disbelief. Picture a room full of people, once hopeful, now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their faces a canvas of polite bewilderment as a prominent public figure launched into what many would soon describe as a relentless torrent of verbal vomit. This wasn't merely another political speech, it was an event that spiraled into an online sensation, a moment of collective cringe. Then, almost as if summoned by the universal sigh of confusion, a lone figure from late-night television stepped into the arena. Armed with a wit sharper than any blade, he didn't just critique, he performed a surgical comedic takedown so mercilessly effective, some are now lightheartedly suggesting NASA might need to track the smoke trail. If you'd ever believed the era of impactful, incisive late-night commentary was dead and buried, prepare to have your assumption shattered. What unfolded wasn't just politics. It was a devastatingly precise, hilariously brutal performance art piece, executed with the raw, untamed power of a flamethrower. Get ready, because we are about to plunge headfirst into the exhilarating, chaotic carnage that just detonated across live television.
Report, Kamala Harris has created her own scented candle. And just like her, it gets lit every night. She's a drunk.
Kamala seems to have suddenly remembered that we actually have a border. For she's announced she's going to the border. True, after 4 years of denying there's a border crisis, what's changed? Why the 180? Do you suppose it's the polls? Kamala Harris will visit the southern border on Friday. She said she's looking forward to finally meeting Justin Trudeau. Speaking of Harris, at the last debate, she said she was a middle-class kid. However, it appears Harris enjoyed things most middle-class kids didn't, like living abroad, private school, with some of the wealthiest places on earth. The only thing she didn't enjoy was a nanny, unlike her husband.
The address, intended to be a beacon of clarity, stumbled out of the gate with an anecdote that immediately broadcast its own impending doom. Our central figure, seeking a profound analogy, recounted a viral video depicting elephants at the San Diego Zoo during an earthquake. She vividly described how these magnificent creatures, sensing the tremor, instinctively formed a protective circle, shielding the most vulnerable. Think about it, she implored. What a powerful metaphor. Yet the irony arrived unbidden. Rather than unity or protection, the prevalent thought that rippled across countless minds was a wry, darkly humorous whisper. It's almost like they built a wall. This misfired metaphorical moment unwittingly set the tone for what swiftly devolved into a public speaking event where logic and clarity appeared conspicuously absent, perhaps left lingering in 2020. It became the epitome of a performance that left many questioning if she was, in fact, secretly competing in some invisible world championship of word salads. As the public acclimated to the disorienting fog machine of her public persona, Gutfeld materialized, armed with sarcasm sharper than a sushi chef's knife, possessing zero patience for such persistent incoherence, particularly when delivered with unshakable poise.
Not to mention, Trump is the wall candidate, not Cackle's McKnee pads. Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Hold on. I need a minute. You know, maybe they can circle around your husband, Doug, to protect vulnerable nannies. But Kamala brought that long-winded story in for a landing with this poignant lesson.
Because we know those who try to incite fear are most effective when they divide and conquer, when they separate the herd, when they try to make everyone think they are alone. But in the face of crisis, the lesson is don't scatter.
So powerful. But wouldn't it be more powerful with bongos?
Because we know those who try to incite fear are most effective.
Yet, initial perplexing metaphors were merely the opening act in a narrative of public relations challenges and shifting stances. Our subject also captured headlines recently with an astonishing announcement. After 4 long years of what many perceived as a steadfast denial of any substantive crisis at the nation's southern border, she abruptly declared her intention to personally visit the frontier. A collective question instantly materialized. What precisely had fundamentally changed? What prompted such a complete, unambiguous 180-degree pivot? Was it, as many speculated, a belated, pragmatic response to plummeting public opinion polls? This sudden reversal emerged precisely amidst a speech purportedly designed to be uplifting, energizing, and presidential. Instead, it unfurled with the disjointed grace of an interpretive dance composed entirely of verbal gymnastics. A satirical report even emerged, highlighting the absurdity, suggesting she had created her own scented candle. And just like her, it gets lit every night. This cheeky aside, implying a fondness for drink, subtly wove into the larger narrative of her perceived lack of groundedness. At one baffling juncture, reports surfaced that attendees ceased taking notes, frantically checking Wi-Fi, convinced a buffering circle had invaded reality. Further, our figure had recently made a contentious declaration, asserting her origins as a middle-class kid. However, her well-documented life story unveiled a strikingly different narrative: years residing abroad, matriculation at elite private schools in wealthy enclaves. The stark contrast between proclaimed identity and actual experiences was glaring, a rich vein Gutfeld was poised to mine.
It's hard to kind of figure out what she's saying. Why doesn't anybody ever ask an follow-up question? Like, what do you mean?
Well, that should have happened in the debate.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, doesn't do interviews. You would not see her come onto the show, I can tell you right now.
We ask her now. Come on this show, Kamala. We'll have a box of wine.
She doesn't like doing interviews.
Well, first, I want to point out something Jessica said, that Trump began as a millionaire and now he's a billionaire. I think that makes him an expert in this. I would rather listen to somebody who began as a millionaire and is now a billionaire than somebody who doesn't have a damn clue about economics. I've never heard a candidate today more unsure of themselves on a topic than Kamala Harris. I think she's been burdened by the weight of expectations put on her by the media. I've never seen a better campaign ad for Trump. She's campaigning better for Trump than Trump is.
The public speaking miscues and verbal fumbles were not confined solely to formal addresses. A particularly excruciatingly awkward interview with Howard Stern provided an even richer trove of material for Gutfeld's unsparing wit. When Stern, attempting empathy, articulated, "I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment? I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country." Her response was a masterclass in unintentional comedy. Her protracted reply, punctuated by excruciatingly long pauses and nervous laughter, only amplified the palpable unease. Gutfeld's reaction was swift and merciless. This was no mere commentary. It was a surgical demolition. He didn't just critique, he metaphorically performed open heart surgery with a chainsaw, laying bare the exposed nerves of her public communication style. Every pause became a setup, every cliche an instant comedic bullseye. Watching him react was akin to witnessing a seasoned roast master presented with the easiest target imaginable. A speech so breathtakingly devoid of substance, it made elevator music seem edgy. Her words, often repetitive and lacking meaning, felt like confusing riddles, leaving audiences disoriented. Her speeches were characterized by unsettling silences, metaphors that felt less like insights and more like like perplexing riddles, and facial expressions extraordinary in their unintentional comedic effect. Gutfeld's own facial expressions throughout the ordeal became a masterclass in restrained disbelief. His eyebrows performed backflips with every verbal misstep, his smirks loaded with the slow certainty of a software update, each more devastating than the last. At various points, he appeared less like a commentator and more like an ordinary person suddenly afflicted by a nagging doubt. Did I leave the oven on? While being subjected to a prolonged TED Talk seemingly penned by a sentient motivational magnet. The absurdity wasn't confined solely to her delivery. It was compounded by the unwavering confidence with which she delivered it. Gutfeld, observing it all, internally declared, "Challenge accepted." One moment, she'd expound on equity as if unearthing it from a fortune cookie. The next, she'd describe America's future with the saccharine tones of a motivational screensaver. Meanwhile, Gutfeld remained steadfast, dissecting every absurdity with the surgical precision of a man still haunted by a lost bet that compelled him to endure 4 soul-crushing hours of TED Talks about nothing.
We'll go back to you, Vice President Harris. You flip-flopped on a lot of issues. How can voters be sure you won't keep doing that if you're elected?
Look, again, I come from a middle-class family, right? My values have never changed on that, right? I've talked about my grass being green for quite some time now. All right, and as a former, prosecutor and former state attorney general and, Willie Brown's ex, shout out to my brothers and sisters, right?
About Joe, but what about Kamala? Well, just like the corpse, it's now okay to talk about how terrible the clown was, too. Because before, it would have been career suicide to spill the beans and commit an act of actual journalism. Ripping on Kamala now is about as risky as wearing leather chaps to a pride parade. Right, Dr. Drew?
The poignant moment when Harris brought her long-winded elephant story to what she intended as a poignant, impactful landing was a goldmine for Gutfeld. Her concluding lesson, because we know those who try to incite fear are most effective when they divide and conquer, when they separate the herd, when they try to make everyone think they are alone. But in the face of crisis, the lesson is don't scatter. So powerful. The moment hung in the air, intended to inspire. Gutfeld's immediate, deadpan retort, delivered with chilling lack of emotion, was pure comedic genius. So powerful, but wouldn't it be more powerful with bongos? The man didn't even flinch, while segments of the media clutched pearls over how inspiring her message was. Greg Gutfeld commanded center stage, smirk on his face, like someone observing an audition reel for a political satire masterpiece. Every time Harris layered on another abstract metaphor, something about bridges, or dreams, or the future feeling like jazz hands, Gutfeld responded with the weary air of someone forced to read aloud from a maddening script titled "Help, my GPS is speaking in poetry." You could almost hear his internal monologue. Did she genuinely just articulate that out loud? On purpose? Then came the avalanche of comedic retribution. Gutfeld didn't merely roll his eyes. He constructed a verbal trampoline, launching himself directly over every flimsy assertion Harris attempted to float. Where she scattered inspirational one-liners like confetti, Greg pulled out the vacuum cleaner of logic and sucked the glitter right off the floor. What transpired was less a critique and more a comedy roast, delivered with PhD precision. She came with sound bites, he came with sound judgment and a fire hose of sarcasm. The audience didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or Google what Harris actually meant. Greg, unfazed, poured cold clarity on the fever dream of empty slogans and circular logic, like hosting a telethon for lost political coherence.
I think it's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders, for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
You know, that's some bad weed. Generally, when people get high, they actually have some interesting thoughts. Not her. We're so paranoid about her public behavior, they held a fake party ahead of a DC dinner in 2022. Her aides even considered serving wine so she could practice with a glass or two, but decided not to. Good call. The only time Kamala stops after 2 glasses is when she switches to chugging Listerine.
Gutfeld highlighted a puzzling issue. Harris rarely consents to unscripted interviews with challenging journalists, leaving her often unchallenged in her rhetorical wanderings. While her team crafted controlled environments, Gutfeld extended a public invitation for her to grace his show, complete with a box of wine, fully aware she'd decline. This refusal to engage solidified the perception of a carefully guarded artificial persona, but Gutfeld delved deeper than speeches. He unwrapped the entire Kamala brand like a baffling Christmas present filled with bewildering socks and vague promises. Her infamous cackle, head tilt, and hand gestures all became ripe game for his arsenal. He compared her appearances to interpretive mime acts, absent silence but full of nervous laughter. It wasn't mean, it was surgically precise. It was the comedic equivalent of a Michelin star meal, exquisitely crafted, perfectly seasoned, and delivered with flair. The truth, you don't have to dislike Harris to concede that listening to her feels like your brain operating on Windows 95, lag, spinning icon, then a frustrating reboot. Gutfeld held a mirror to this chaos, essentially saying, "See? You're not crazy, that did just happen, right?" He pointed out gaffes, then constructed a 3-act play around them, transforming missteps into comedic genius. He painted a vivid picture where you could hear the teleprompter wheezing as Harris attempted to conjugate hope into a concrete plan. He noted how a certain former president's wealth growth made him an expert by contrast, and how Harris often appears unsure on economics, burdened by media expectations, humorously suggesting she's campaigning for Trump. He wove in facial expressions, mismatched metaphors, and choreographed enthusiasm, assembling them like a puzzle made of wet noodles. It's hilarious, not harsh, but precise. Every moment felt like deja vu for anyone who's watched her interviews, wondering if they missed the point, or if the point never existed. He made the whole thing feel like comedy therapy for a nation stuck buffering. Millions tuned in not to learn or debate, but to watch someone finally articulate the quiet truth. Kamala Harris delivers speeches like assembling IKEA furniture without the manual. Gutfeld emerged as the guide, holding the weird Allen key, muttering, "I think you missed a piece." The beauty of his takedown lies in its profound lack of anger. It wasn't even political, it was observational comedy with a political twist, like George Carlin in a blazer watching C-SPAN. Harris willingly supplied the raw material, like a contestant on Whose Line Is It Anyway? Executive Edition. But Gutfeld's dismantling went deeper. He broke down her pauses like a film critic analyzing a foreign art flick. He highlighted moments where her eyes pleaded with the universe for a sentence to land correctly. He zoomed in on audience confusion, tilted heads, forced smiles, people checking phones like a fire drill might save them. He dissected her Twitter feed, an archive of syntactic anarchy and motivational vagueness. One tweet, generated by ChatGPT trained on Pinterest quotes, he read aloud like a bedtime story for exhausted voters. Somewhere, a PR intern wept. What truly propelled Gutfeld's segment was his contextualization. He painted a picture of an administration so desperate for enthusiasm, they handed the mic to someone who makes talking feel like a contact sport. His sarcasm didn't come from cruelty, but pure, unfiltered bewilderment. The kind you feel when someone says the moon is a metaphor for justice, and they're not kidding. He didn't scream, he didn't rant, he simply looked straight into the camera, blinked slowly, and let the absurdity marinate. And somehow, that was funnier than any punchline. One of her most convoluted quotes. "I think it's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future." Gutfeld's succinct retort, "You know that's some bad weed. Generally when people get high, they actually have some interesting thoughts, not her." This is his genius. He wasn't inventing comedy, he was harvesting it. Every past soundbite became a puzzle piece in his mosaic of hilarity. Predictably, Gutfeld's commentary was not universally embraced. The pearl-clutching squad accused him of undermining public office, as if Harris hadn't done that explaining democracy like a yoga instructor explaining Mercury in retrograde. For some time, public figures tiptoed around direct criticism. Now, to rip on a prominent figure felt as risky as wearing leather chaps to a pride parade, signaling shifting public opinion. Meanwhile, the majority were grateful someone finally articulated what they thought. Listening to Harris Harris is like a TED Talk that stumbled into a poetry slam. Her events feel like an improv class with flashcards. Gutfeld seized this and made it art. He molded the collective cringe into a masterpiece of mockery, a highlight reel of cognitive dissonance delivered with a grin. The truth, Harris isn't hard to parody because she's political. She's hard because the parody writes itself. Gutfeld arrived with a megaphone, proclaiming what everyone was too polite to admit. Leadership sometimes feels like juggling ideas blindfolded in a wind tunnel. He called out the performance without pretending it was profound. He stripped away reverence, showing the awkward musical that plays when style replaces substance. And he did it with the glee of someone who knows comedy, unlike politics, still respects coherence. He even brought up her greatest hits: the fake French accent, circular definitions, awkward laughter. He didn't need to exaggerate. Reality was absurd enough. All he had to do was point. Even the segment's ending was gold. No dramatic monologue, just a shrug, a raised eyebrow, and the subtle implication we'd witnessed something extraordinary and terrifying. A political Bigfoot sighting, except Bigfoot is better at delivering lines. By the end, it felt less like critique and more like a support group for everyone who's watched a Harris speech and thought, did I just black out? Gutfeld gave voice to that confusion, structured it, then lit it on fire, roasting marshmallows over the wreckage. It was beautiful. And here's the kicker. He did it without being mean. Snarky, sure, but not mean. To be mean, you'd hate your subject. Gutfeld doesn't hate Harris. He's completely mystified by her. Her aides, paranoid about her public behavior, even held a fake party before a 2022 DC dinner, contemplating serving wine so she could practice with a glass or two, but decided against it. Gutfeld's bewilderment mirrors a diner served a bowl of air, trying to write a Yelp review without sounding unhinged. So where does this leave us? With Harris still fumbling metaphors like a drunk magician at a children's party, and with Greg Gutfeld, popcorn in hand, reminding everyone that a pantsuit doesn't guarantee sense. He didn't just roast her, he conducted a symphony of satire using her own notes. As long as she supplies the sheet music, Gutfeld will be there, grinning, commenting, turning confusion into comedy gold. If there's one thing funnier than her speeches, it's watching Greg Gutfeld survive them, sanity intact, sarcasm fully charged. And honestly, someone has to do it.